So, my name is Kate Trams, and I want to welcome you to the American Indian and Alaska Native Prevention webinar series. This is the fourth session in our wellness series, and we're going to do mostly some review today of the sessions that we've had so far, and if we have time, we might cover some resilience, but most likely, we are planning to have a full session on resilience that we'll set the date for here shortly. So we'll let you know when that's going to happen. This training series is brought to you by the National American Indian and Alaska Native Prevention Technology Transfer Center. We are part of the PTTC network, which also includes 10 regional centers, a network coordinating office, and the National Hispanic and Latino PTTC. In the next couple of days, we will send up an email to everyone who attended, which will include a link to the recording, handouts of the slides, and I realized oh no, I've got the information on here. If you want CEUs, you can just reply to that email. That's the best way to get that done, and we can send you CEUs for your attendance. We do have a short survey that we would love to have you fill out after our session today. I'll put the link in the chat box towards the end of the session. So we really appreciate your feedback. It's very important for our ability to keep offering sessions like this. So if this is in any way helpful to you, please take a few minutes and fill that out. Just for a couple things to go over Zoom if you haven't used it before. We'd love to have your comments and thoughts shared in the chat throughout. And then if you have questions, we will hopefully have some time for some questions and sharing at the end of the session. At that time, you can either put that in the chat, or you can also unmute yourself and ask questions that way at the end if you'd like. And I want to introduce our speaker for today. We have Dr. Avis Garcia. She has been directing us in this series. It's been a really wonderful series of wellness for providers, focusing on how we can keep ourselves healthy and keep ourselves hopeful and dealing with all of the things that you're dealing with, your work, and this really difficult time. So I want to introduce her. She's an enrolled member of the Northern Arapaho Nation and is affiliated with the Eastern Shoshone Tribe of Wyoming. She earned a doctorate in counselor education and supervision at the University of Wyoming, and she's also a licensed professional counselor and licensed addictions therapist. And for 19 years, she's been a mental health provider in the treatment of Native American youth and families. If you've been on here, you know that Dr. Garcia is a really wonderful teacher, and she's got so much to share. And I'm so glad that she's here with us. I want to pass things over to you now. Thanks so much, Dr. Garcia.
Okay. I just would like to take a moment to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules today. You're taking the time to be here shows that you care about yourself and the people that you work with. So I'm always happy to share whatever I can to help the people that seek our services. Today's presentation is about half of it is going to be a brief overview of the first three presentations that I've done. The first one I did was on grief and loss, and then we had self-care, and then stress management. And at the end of one of the self-care sessions, someone had suggested I talk about resiliency. So towards the end, I'm gonna do an introduction to resiliency, and then later on, I will plan on doing a couple of sessions on resiliency that are specific to youth, and then specific for helping professionals and working with their clients. So to start off, we're gonna review the grief and loss, and talking about what grief is. And it's just a part of life. It's one of the most sad parts of life that we all have to experience at some point in time. And there's just no way to avoid it. And some people need help getting through it because they've never experienced a close loss in their life. And not all losses that we experience are from death. We can change the slide. Some facts about grief. Trying to ignore your pain or keeping it from surfacing will only make it worse in the long run. Some people might feel sad, frightened, or being lonely. That's a normal reaction to loss. And crying is normal. That's all a part of the mourning process, and there's no right or wrong time frame for grieving. We can go to the next. What is grief? It is the deep or intense sorrow or distress, especially at the death of someone. It's something that causes us to have distress and suffering as a response to that loss. The goal of grief work is to more fully engage in life and to be open to the future. And go to the next slide. Grief is a normal reaction to loss. It's a continuing process with many changes. No relationship is like another. How loss impacts us will depend on the unique relationship we had with what is lost. We can go to the next slide. Some of the various losses we may have experienced is the loss of a spouse, either through death or divorce, and loss of a child through death or divorce, loss of family. Some people experience miscarriage or abortion. And for a lot of people, losing pets is a big thing because pets are like our family. We go to the next slide. Some other various losses we might experience could be loss of functioning through disability. Someone could lose a sense of their identity through that, losing a sense of security. Some have experienced childhood abuse or trauma that they didn't get to experience a good childhood. Some people lose their jobs, which also means a loss of financial stability. And for some, a loss of health. We have a lot of health conditions that people struggle with, such as cancer and heart problems and other illnesses that could lead to death. You can go to the next slide. The nature of grief, it's different for everyone. All of the support systems we have vary. No one deals with grief the same. We all do it differently. And when I talk about differently, and we look at reflecting on cultural and religious experience, our different cultures, our different tribes all have different ways of looking at grief and loss. We all handle that differently in our own communities, and as well as religious as well. We go to the next slide. The types of grief, we can have anticipatory. That's what we experience before the loss. This is common with terminal illnesses, when we know someone is not going to live through the illness that they're suffering with. And then there's uncomplicated, which is often referred to as normal reaction to loss. Go to the next slide. A couple of other types of grief. One that I learned doing this presentation was the disenfranchised grief. That is a loss that we can't openly acknowledge or validate or publicly mourn, such as HIV patients, mistresses and lovers, ex-partners, losing a substance abuse lifestyle, miscarriages, pet, those types of things. And for a lot of us, we are experiencing a lot of grief with a lot of loss of our freedoms that we had before this COVID occurred. And then there's the complicated grief, which is often referred to as the chronic grief, where someone really struggles more than what some people might think is normal, and that needs to be looked at a little more closely. You go to the next slide. Now, some people really struggle with grief, and like I said, everyone deals with this differently. There is chronic grief. This can happen when there's been several losses, one after another. So some people might not have time to recover or heal before experiencing another loss in their life. Some delayed grief reaction. For some unknown reason, people may not be able to handle the grief or choose to just not deal with it at all. And again, with this COVID, I see a lot of stuff on the news, and I hear stories from people back home that these funerals that are being held for the people with the coronavirus that die from it, it's a whole different scenario. So I can predict that there's going to be a lot of people that are going to struggle with how those endings occurred in their life. And some that just avoid grieving, pretending that it didn't occur, and it doesn't really help people by avoiding it. It eventually surfaces in different areas of one's life. You go to the next slide. Can you go to the next slide? The complicated grief. This is an ongoing, heightened reaction to mourning that keeps a client from healing. And here's several signs and symptoms there. And I know if you're an experienced counselor, you'll have a gut feeling of knowing when this is a problem for someone. And the reason why I like to bring this up is I work as a substance abuse counselor as well, and a big trigger for a lot of our clients that relapse are those that haven't dealt with their grief. I have some that, something reminded them of their mother that passed, and they weren't prepared for, dealing with that, and the way they learned to cope with that was by using substances. You can go to the next slide. Some more signs could be recurrent thoughts about the death, thinking over and over, some behaviors trying to block out the painful reality, such as leaving the room or leaving a room untouched. And as long as I've been working, I've heard a lot of stories of especially older couples when they've spent several years with their partner are not comfortable with having things move that belong to the person they shared their life with. Feelings of guilt or anger that are difficult to control. Some people, it's survivor's guilt, and that can be a little complicated. Continue to the next slide. Some risk factors of complicated grief. It occurs more often in females and with older age. Factors that may increase the risk of developing complicated grief include losing a loved one to a sudden or violent way, an unexpected death, loss of a child, close or dependent relationship to the deceased. People who are vulnerable to mood or anxiety disorders can experience this a lot more complicated, as well as PTSD. In some situations, some people have witnessed that loss, and that could be very traumatic in addition to just accepting the loss. Traumatic childhood experiences can make it more complicated. And we can go on to the next slide. Some support for complicated grief is always be present. Take the initiative to make contact with that person, because most likely they're not going to reach out to you. Listen. The main thing they really need is for someone to just sit with them and listen. Just having someone there is helpful. Go into the next slide. Some more support for complicated grief. Just providing help with problem solving in the spirit of partnership. Let them lean on you, be respectful of their mourning process, and allow them to remember and talk about the deceased person, and look for ways to help them feel more positive about the present and have hope for their future. You can go to the next slide. Support for, some more support for complicated grief. Be aware of your own feelings about what you want from the bereaved person and what you can do for them. Don't push them, and let them find ways to meet their own needs, and encourage them to ask for help. Coming to see a counselor is probably the best thing they can do, but not everyone is going to do that. So sometimes with a little encouragement, we can get them to reach out for help. We can go to the next slide. Some physical responses. A lot of people are more willing to go to the doctor and talk about all of the health problems they're experiencing, such as not feeling like they can breathe, having stomach problems, not sleeping, their mood is not normal. And some people who don't understand that their grief is a normal reaction might even think that they have depression. So just be aware of that. Go to the next slide. Some cognitive responses there are physical signs and cognitive signs. When someone is going through grief, it's not a good time to be making any major decisions because there's a lot of confusion and not being able to concentrate as more fully as we are when we're not dealing with that type of a situation. So there's a whole lot of different reactions. So that's some cognitive responses. So the next slide shows the behavioral responses to grief, which can include impaired work or school performance, by crying, withdrawing from people, overreaction, self-destructive behaviors. Some people may use substances and not know any other way to deal with that. The substance helps them to numb the pain and prevents them from working through this task. So when the people finally sober up and get in recovery, I remind them, you've been numbing this out for a long time. So this is something, we need to help you work through it so you can move on in your life. We can go to the next slide. There's some spiritual responses to grief as well. Some people may lose faith in God or whatever higher power they subscribe to, not understanding why could this happen to me or them, being angry, and wondering what the meaning and purpose of that loss is. You can go to the next slide. The first research that came out was done by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She came up with this model of the grief cycle. And sorry, I can't control why that is changing, but if you see there's these different stages of going through the grief and loss, and it doesn't necessarily follow it in that exact order, but it just gives an idea of it can reach a real low point before they start to come out of the depression and start feeling better and begin to move on in their life. The next slide covers 4 tasks of mourning. As we navigate the changes we experience and the sense of loss we have. About changes, we move along a continuum from chaos after the loss occurs to a new normal homeostasis, letting go of what was and accepting of what is coming into being. So being able to work through it, adjust, and emotionally relocate the lost person into a place where you can move on with your life. The next slide, what can you say or do? Sorry for your loss. I can't imagine what you're going through. I don't know what to say. Or you can just be silent. Like I said, all they need is someone to just keep them company and just listen to them and be there when they need help. The next slide talks about some warning signs. And as I shared a little bit earlier, you'll probably have a gut feeling when someone needs more help. It is real important to pay attention to those signs that they may be displaying, such as preoccupation of the person, being angry, withdrawing. A lot of people, this may be their first time to experience a loss. So I think that first time is really a lot harder for most people. Going on to the next slide of grief work. The goal is not to forget the person or to forget what you lost, but to remember in a way that you're able to move on in your life. and developing some coping mechanisms and making meaning. I think a lot of this work that I read did talk about being able to make meaning. And when you're helping someone who's grieving, again, I just said being there to listen, offer practical help. Maybe you need to, they need help with dinner or watching the kids or anything you could do that might be helpful. Making contact, writing a personal note, being aware of the holidays and the anniversaries, because the first year after the loss of someone is very difficult to go through. The next slide says if you're providing grief services, just knowing that you're listening, communicating empathy is at the top of the list. Again, listening, just listening, and using those listening skills. Don't expect them to accept your solutions, and listen to what is not being said. There's a lot going on if you pay attention to body language. And on to the next slide is getting support. Okay, I lost that. Getting support. If you are grieving, don't do it alone. Face your feelings, express your feelings in a tangible and creative way. Make sure you take good care of yourself. Self-care is important. You need to look after your physical care and also plan ahead for grief triggers. Turn to friends and family and maybe even join a support group. Helping others through grief is the next slide. Again, I said anger might be part of the problem. Don't ask questions. Don't ask them how they died. Offer them opportunities to share when they're ready, and give them the time that they need, and help them find support. Another thing to watch out for is suicidal ideation, and homicide ideation. So those are important to be mindful of. Some techniques you could use could be the Gestalt technique, which includes use of an empty chair, some journaling, writing letters to the deceased, saying goodbye, role-playing, bibliotherapy, some rituals and customs. When grieving, sorry, my slides jumped ahead. Helping yourself through grief, okay. When the grieving is over, when a person can think of what was lost without a lot of pain, and when the tasks of mourning have been accomplished. And then the last one here is there a time limit? My tribe, where I come from, we believe that you have a year to grieve, and that is your grieving period. And it's normal to go through that. So I learned that from my grandparents, and that's what really helped me. And also during those times, I was also raised by my grandparents, who taught me to practice and go to our ceremonies, because that helped me more than anything ever did, because a counselor wasn't a place where I felt comfortable at that time. And just remember the last slide of grief is a normal and necessary process that is fundamentally a journey of the heart and soul, and that's by Dr. Alan Wolfelt. Like I say, it's a part of life that we all experience. It's not a good part, but we learn things and we grow from that. The next session we'll review was the self-care presentation that I did. And why is self-care important? It's an essential part of your mental health and wellness, makes you more productive, helps us cope with stress, and gives us reserves for those more challenging times, makes it easier to take care of people. It builds our resilience. It's the #1 resilience builder is our self-care. And if you don't do it, who is going to do it for you? The next slide gives some reasons why people don't get help. We think we shouldn't have problems, and we feel embarrassed to ask for help from our peers. And I myself go to counseling from time to time. I have some situations that I just need an objective opinion, and sometimes just talking it out helps me to put it in a different perspective where it's a lot more manageable or understandable. So I've had friends tell me, "You're a counselor. Counselors go get help." And I'm like, yeah, we do. We're trained to know when we need to take care of ourselves, even if that includes going to see a therapist ourselves. The next slide is, how is this crisis we're experiencing different? It's universal. We're going through this across the country, around the world. And this uncertainty of when is this going to end? In my own mind, I thought we'd be through this by now, and it's still there. So we don't know when it's going to end. The next slide, we are experiencing some grief from this COVID, a loss of freedom, a loss of comfort, a loss of normalcy. We're already starting to be concerned about, do we want to send our children to school if they have asthma and they're at a higher risk? So there's a lot going on around this COVID. The next slide talks about the helplessness, the resource scarcity when this first hit. I personally had calls from my husband who was on the road being concerned if I had enough toilet paper, did I get enough groceries? There were stores were clearing their shelves off, and so people were worried they were going to run out of food. So it's been a little bit of a helpless feeling. Sleep and the COVID. And the next slide. A lot of people are reporting more vivid and recurring dreams. People are better able to recall them. Some people are having difficulty sleeping altogether. So again, it's taking care of yourself and finding some good sleep hygiene practices. The next slide talks about virtual meeting fatigue, and there's days, most of my day is just on the computer doing what I'm doing now. I work in a substance abuse treatment agency, so we offer a lot of our classes are being done online as well as in person for some of those that don't handle the technology very well. The next slide is just a picture. I'll talk about resilience briefly at the end, but when you look about flexibility and resilience, this is a picture I found when I went to Chicago one summer to study while I was working on my dissertation. And this is on my reservation. This is the Episcopal mission. And a lot of these I'm going to assume are Shoshone students who were forced into boarding school at that time. And sadly, half of these children did not survive this boarding school experience. So I am so admirable of those who gone through it and survived it, like my own grandparents, because I think those are the most resilient people we have in our tribal communities. Going on to the next session is dealing with stress, and a lot of people like to assess their own stress level. On the next slide, I have included a handout today that I gave to Kate that she'll make available to you all. This is called the Professional Quality of Life Scale. It's a self-assessment you can use yourself or give to all of your staff if you want to, do this in the workplace so that people can evaluate themselves and see where they stand as far as burnout and how well they're taking care of themselves, or even just finding ways to see some places where you can do some self-improvement for yourself. The next slide is some subjective units of distress, and I use this in anger management as well. This is being able to look at this as a temperature gauge, and the bottom in the green there is when you're under low stress, and the red up on top is high stress. And so you want to kind of keep it in the, below the 50% line there. Not everybody is perfect, but just a way to monitor yourself. Of sometimes we're going to be up in the red, so we'll need to take extra care of ourselves. So I just like being able to refer to that. And 20 ways that you can take care of yourself, starting with the next slide. You see, number 1, is limit your exposure to distressing content. When the COVID first started, I noticed I was getting stressed by the amount of news that was on the TV. So sometimes I just had to shut it off. Number 2 is knowing what you can control. Focus on what you can control. You know what they say about when the shit hits the fan, you're gonna have a big mess. The next slide is starting a gratitude journal of writing at least 3 things you're grateful for every day for at least 21 days. Actually shows that people will feel more positive about life if they do this on a daily basis. And it's good for the whole family. You'll naturally become more positive as you focus more on the positive. Number 4 is limiting junk food intake, and that will increase your feelings of well-being. I know we've all been cooped up inside and probably eating a lot more stuff. Number 5, focus on what you can do now. And I use this a lot in counseling with people, and I'll draw it like an egg because my circles are never perfect. And so right in the middle is what we can control, and what's out in the light green area is what we have some influence over. And now out in the blues, there's some things we just have no control over. Determine what's most important in your life. Number 6 is being kind to yourself. Practice self-compassion. Give yourself a little treat once in a while away from your family because you deserve it. Number 7, get some exercise. I know it says 3 to 4 hours a week, but I've seen research that shows just a brisk walk at least 3 times a week for 20, 30 minutes. Even if you break it up into miniature walks of 15 here, 15 there, you can get a little exercise, especially now while the weather is nice out. Practice some mindful meditation. Practice mindfulness. This shows all the benefits. It helps your stress, it boosts your energy, improves your sleep. YouTube has a lot of meditations on there. And for some of you, I like to just focus on prayer sometimes, and that's very helpful. Number 9 is planning at least one pleasant activity a day. So finding something different to do every day that you enjoy. Number 10 is doing some self-soothing. This little picture I have on the left-hand side is a grounding technique. I got this off of Pinterest. So if you're ever looking for anything like this, you can find that. It's 5 things you can see, 4 things you can feel, 3 you can hear, 2 you can smell, and 1 you can taste. So that's what they call grounding, being able to ground yourself. Number 11 is engaging in a solo hobby, something that's not work related and doesn't involve another person. So every now and then I like to get the beads out and work on something. One of my favorite things to make is baby moccasins. I like to give those as gifts to family and friends. Number 12, go outside, go enjoy being outside. This is Estes Park. This is not too far from where I'm from, and it's one of the most beautiful places that I enjoy. Number 13 is practicing yoga. I hear all the benefits. I've never done it. I've yet to do it. But the people that I know that do it, they always seem to just be glowing. And so just from the way they carry themselves, I can tell that yoga is really good for them. And number 14, everyone needs one person. I shared this picture. This is my grandparents. They took care of me when my own parents couldn't take care of me when I was growing up. And I always had them to lean on. They were always there. Research shows, even my own dissertation research shows, that we can all be successful and resilient if we have one person in our life that we can lean on. So you could be that one person for someone who needs someone. Number 15, we all need sleep. Follow some good practices, be consistent, have a routine with that. Number 16, do something that gives you joy. Ask yourself a couple of questions of what gives you joy, what makes you happy, what gives you more meaning, and do more of those things. Number 17 is connecting with people daily. I have a friend who she checks in on me every day, and so we check in through FaceTime videos, and it's fun to just have somebody to connect with, because again, we're spending so much time at home that it's nice to connect. I meet with a friend once a week and we work out together with Zoom. Number 18 is doing hopeful things, planning a garden, dreaming about the future, planning a vacation, something that inspires you. 19, look for the silver linings. They're all around us. It's having a positive viewpoint that can make a big difference in your life. And the next section we're going into is the stress management. What is stress? Okay, we're on there. Where is stress? Sorry, I lost my place in my slides here. Okay, stress management.
No, my apologies, Avis. It seems like every time I switch to the next slide, it has like an automatic one to change to the next one. So I apologize that it's looking like it's flipping back and forth.
It's doing that to me too, so I took it out of the slideshow presentation because it was switching before I was done. Okay, what is stress? Stress is a normal and natural part of life. We react physically, mentally, and emotionally. The stress we experience is also rooted in the flight or fight response that we needed millions of years ago when we had to run from lions and tigers and dinosaurs. So our body is naturally geared for protecting itself. And the constant demands of work and our personal life can also lead to a stress overload. Eustress is good stress. This is coined by a psychologist named Richard Lazarus in talking about how stress can be positive. And some examples that are there is winning a race, getting married, having a baby, anything that's good for you. There is stress that can be good stress. Creating a stress-reducing lifestyle, important to remember proper nutrition, healthy nutrition, getting some exercise, sleeping well. And next is the AAA approach. The AAA approach looks at how we approach stress that is an unavoidable part of our life. We can alter the situation, we can avoid it, or we can accept it. The next slide is altering your attitude, which is the first A, identifying appropriate actions, creating effective actions. So it's just being able to change your attitude of being open to it. Avoiding stress that comes with transition. These stress and anxiety are close companions that can trigger the other. Stress comes from certain circumstances that should not be happening. And then there's anxiety. And as we grieve for what we're letting go of, it's our birthright to transform and think of what serves us best and let go of what no longer serves us. So sometimes there's things in our life that we need to eliminate. Sometimes it's setting boundaries, learning to say no. Adapting and overcoming fear is accepting the transition to change. Changing your perspective, put the past behind you, being realistic with expectations, getting more information, and being a part of the change. Just to summarize the AAA approach one more time, on the next slide is, again, we can alter it, We can try to avoid it, or we can be open and accept it. And then recognizing when there is a stress overload. Sometimes we have to look at how much stress are we dealing with, how much is on our plate, how much can we really handle this? Are you alone? Is there a way you can get help? Are you noticing changes in your physical and emotional well-being? Like I said earlier about the grief and loss, people are much more willing to go to their doctor and talk about their physical ailments than to actually talk about what's going on in their life that could be causing their stress to be more than what we really need and what's beyond our ability to handle. The next slide talks about planning routines. It is real important, if you can, to plan your day out so you have an idea in your mind how that's going to go. It helps you to be more organized, planning meals, organizing chores, using to-do lists. One of the things I've tried this last, I want to say, 6 or 7 months now, has been the home chef. And I love it because all the ingredients come in the box and the instructions are pretty simple, and it's kind of fun cooking dinner, and you feel like a chef when you're done because you make stuff you never would have thought of. Some physical signs of stress could be headaches, muscle tension. I get migraines, so self-care for me is a real priority in my life. And I've learned from tracking myself whenever I have a problem of like how long. So for me, if I don't get the sleep that I need, I'm probably going to get a migraine. So I really try to work on taking care of myself. Some more signs of stress on the next slide are lack of concentration and focus, having memory problems, being forgetful, being irritable, being a little on edge. Some physical relaxation techniques on the next slide you might want to consider trying could be doing some stretches, doing some deep breathing, tensing and relaxing, using the butterfly hugs, also known as tapping, and some meditation. Coping with major events. Sometimes we all have a lot of stress, so it's important to have a support system, create a plan, and know when you need help. Always be willing to ask for help. That's one thing I wish I would have learned a long time ago. I always had a fear to ask people for help, and now I ask for it a lot. Healthy slumber tips. Like I said, it's good to set a regular bedtime, be consistent. I've seen a lot of research that talks about shutting off all the screens an hour to 2 hours before you go to bed. Planning your morning, sometimes getting your clothes ready, your books ready. I have a work bag. Sometimes I got to throw stuff in there that needs to go with me. Journaling your thoughts, keeping a diary, or reading a book. That's one of my favorite things to do, is read. The next section, I am going to get into the resilience, and we are very running short on time, so I'm going to be really brief in this presentation. But what I did in the research that I did, what I read about resiliency, is a lot of what I just talked to you guys about. Being able to ask for help, taking care of yourself. All of this is what adds to resiliency and makes us more resilient. The next slide is on personal development. It talks about awareness and identity. You could do volunteering, doing lifelong learning, skills, hobbies, getting more education if there's something you always wanted to learn. I tell people I graduated with my PhD when I was 51. I was 47 when I went back to school. I waited till my youngest was a senior, and I decided that was my time to go pursue one of my dreams, so it's never too late. The next slide is on Maslow's hierarchy of self-actualization. At the very bottom is our very, very basic needs, our food, our water, our shelter. And the self-actualization is the very top You can't get to the top without working through the bottom up. Then also another term that comes out in this resiliency on the next slide, for those of you that do research or want to look more into this, is positive psychology. I thought I was just looking resiliency, but it falls along the same lines as positive psychology. Concerned with human experiences, again, we're looking at gratitude, hope, what are your values, being able to forgive, and having positive relationships. Unemployment on the next slide is associated with people who have a lot of health problems. So if you're not taking care of yourself, there's a good chance you're not going to be able to do your job. The next slide is your dreams. Engage in your dreams for the future. Wonder and amazement. For me, I love the Taj Mahal. I think if those of you that know the story of this, it's a very incredible story about the Taj Mahal. The next slide is creativity and imagination. So everybody has their own skills and their own talents. Again, education. There's an inverse relationship between mortality and years of education. So the more education you have, the more vitality you'll have. The next slide talks about learning and expanding the comfort. So if you want to be a good chess player, then play some more games and get really good at what it is you're learning to do. For some, it's basketball. Some, it's for baseball. The next slide is gratitude. This comes out in all of the research that I've done, is being able to be thankful for at least 3 things in your life each day. Doing some volunteer work. There are people who like to volunteer for certain types of events. For me, I have my personal things because of what's happened in my life, of what I like to spend my time on. So, you know, suicide is one. So if there's something going on in the community that's going to help an agency that addresses that, I'll volunteer my time. And the next slide is about altruism, relationships, and giving. One is Mother Teresa, who lived a very humble life, and her whole desire in life was to help people. And the next slide is just to be mindful of burnout. You need to take care of yourself, and we don't want to burn out. And the next slide has a really good book that I discovered called The Resilient Practitioner. For those of you that are in the helping profession, you want to do some more research. I'll be using this in my upcoming presentations. This is really a good book. I got it off of Amazon, and I highly recommend it. The next slide just talks about what contributes to burnout. There's a list of things there, and I apologize due to the lack of time that we have. I have another session that I need to jump on shortly, so I may cut you off in a bit here, a bit too soon, but be watching for the presentations that I will have coming up that will go deeper into the resiliency. And yeah, you will get access to these slides. The key drivers of burnout can be your workload, job demands, control and flexibility, meaning in work. The last 2 weeks, I just needed some time off from work, and I had to let my people know I'm just taking some time out for myself. I had friends coming to visit, and I just wanted to have my time free, and it really helped. So if those of you are feeling a little burnt, maybe you need a little vacation from work. The quadruple aim is to improve the health of our populations, enhance our patient experiences, reduce costs of needing care, and improve the work life and health care of our clinicians and our staff. So it's important to be watching out for others around you as well. And the next slide is a picture. It says, if there's no ups and downs in your life, it means you're dead. I was like, So we all have to have those ups and downs. So what helps with burnout? Again, if you want to be resilient, practice your self-care, do some relaxation things for yourself, get some support groups for clinicians. That's why we have staff meetings. I allow my staff to vent, all their frustrations they might be having with their work and help them come up with ways to help themselves manage it. Sometimes I will tell them they might want to consider some professional counseling for themselves because they look like they need some help. And number one is just managing your time. That's probably the most important thing that will help you to balance your work and your personal life. And I'm going to go on ahead and end it there. Thank you guys again for taking time out of your day to join us. And I hope that what you learned today is something you can take out and share with other people and help them think about making some positive changes in their life.
Thank you so much, Dr. Garcia. I know you have to run because she's actually doing another presentation for another one of our projects here at 1 o'clock. And I want to make sure we end on time too, because we also have our first Native American storytelling session starting here at 1 o'clock Central Time as well. So if some of you may be planning to attend that as well. So, but if you have any questions, we've just maybe got a minute or two before Dr. Garcia has to hop off. And I love the sharing that is going on, the things that people have been mentioning that they've been doing for self-care in the chat. I noticed someone said that they're getting up at 5 a.m. to walk in the mornings before it gets super hot in Texas. That's awesome. I was just telling Dr. Garcia yesterday that just this week I was like, okay, that slide that you had with the dog that says, this is me at 9:58 when I just woke up and I have a 10 o'clock Zoom meeting. That has been me for most of the quarantine. And this week I was like, okay, I'm going to get up at like 6 or 7 in the morning, get myself organized so that I know what's going on. Because you starting off feeling like you're ahead is such a good feeling comparing to feeling like you're playing catch up all day. So somebody's asking for the link to the 1 p.m. session. I will go find that. Somebody says, I've been taking a few long weekends to turn down the dial. That's a great thing to do. I know sometimes it feels hard to take time off right now, or what do we do to take time off? Because, you're just, can you go anywhere? It's very limited, but it really does help to be able to say, I'm not responding to emails. I'm not doing those things. So, okay. Well, let me go grab the link for our 1 o'clock storytelling session, and I'll share that with you. And I just want to say thank you so much, Dr. Garcia. I want to let you get to your other session. It's been so wonderful having you on, and I've learned so much, and it's just so encouraging to spend this time talking about how we can take care of ourselves in a difficult time. Really appreciate it, and we look forward to having you back. We're absolutely going to do a full session on resilience, and so watch for those, that announcement, and we'll look forward to seeing you all then. And I will put the link in the chat here for the storytelling session. Let's see, okay, there is that. And then I also have just our survey as well. If people wouldn't mind taking our survey on this session, just let us know what you thought about that. That would be wonderful. And yeah, with that, I think we can end for the day, and just want to thank you so much, all of you, for joining us, for thinking about how you can care for yourselves, for being, yeah, just all the work that you do for loving and caring for your communities. I know that that is what brings you here, and what, you know, is weighing on you all, and giving you, you know, need for caring for yourself. And I just I ask that you all, like Dr. Garcia said to us in the last few sessions, please do something nice for yourself today. So good. Thank you all, and I hope you have a great day.